I'm Mario Martinez Jr., CEO and founder of Vengreso, and we are the creators of flymessage.io, the free personal writing assistant and text expander application. On each episode of this podcast, you will hear from sales leaders, practitioners, and influencers to help you grow your sales numbers at scale. So, get your pen and paper or iPad and keyboard and start taking notes as you're now listening to the Modern Selling Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Korn Ferry. Korn Ferry integrates their consultancy, Miller Heiman sales methodology, and technology to bring you Korn Ferry Sell for Salesforce and Microsoft Dynamics 365. Learn more at kornferry.com/sales effectiveness. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this episode of the Modern Selling Podcast. And I've got another fantastic guest for today's show. We are focused in on one of my favorite productivity tools in the world. In fact, it was the very first meeting tool that I ever used. Calendly is our guest today. We've got with us Kate Ahlering, the Chief Revenue Officer of Calendly. Kate, welcome to the show.
Whoa, that is some energy you are bringing, Mario. It's good to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, I'm very excited. There's a special place in my heart for Calendly. As a matter of fact, a little secret story. I used to be on Calendly, and then we moved over to HubSpot, and we had some, products that they use for the meeting links inside there. But then we had to actually open back up a Calendly account for a very specific use case. And you know what I loved? I put in my email address, and all my old calendar stuff all came up. And it was so, what's the word? When you think about reminiscent, you're so, like you're looking back and you're like, oh my God, I used to do that. That's right. I used to have that calendar appointment. It was great. I love it. And Calendly actually was my first passion, first love into productivity and productivity tools. Little other story you don't know, but I'll tell you now. Calendly actually has been our inspiration at Vengreso. As you know, we've recently converted into a product-led growth company with flymessage. And everything that we do, from a marketing standpoint to product development standpoint to a go-to-market strategies, we say, who are the great ones out there? And Calendly is one of our top 3 that we go to say, what does Calendly do? How do they do it? And we have been copying and mirroring a lot of your guys' activities and motions. So thank you for the inspiration, and I'm so glad you're with me.
Oh gosh, well, we are just appreciative of your business, and I think all of us in this product-led growth world are all looking around at all of the different strategies that are being deployed across all of these different companies and saying, what's going to work best for me, and how are you doing this? And I know I spend a lot of my days having these types of conversations. So you're not alone. I share in your experience.
I love it. Well, I mentioned to everyone that you are the Chief Revenue Officer, the CRO of Calendly. Just do me a favor, give us a little background about yourself, and then I've got a very special question that I always ask all my guests.
Okay, great. Yeah. So my background, I'm originally an East Coaster. I like to say I'm a recovering East Coaster, now living on the West Coast. I moved west after college and really started in a company called Active.com, Active Network, which was a 2-sided marketplace, consumer brand plus SaaS business. And I just stumbled into it, as you often do. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for post-college, moved out to San Diego at the time, landed with a great high-growth tech company, just was so fortunate to do so, and moved up the ranks of sales IC roles into an enterprise role into sales management, and had a really long run with them over the course of 2 runs. I left and came back. But over the course of about 8 years, and went through hypergrowth and many acquisitions. We went public and then we're taken back private. So just this wealth of experience that I got out of Active Network, I'm so grateful for. Then I moved on to Glassdoor. Hopefully, Glassdoor, and I had just the experience of a lifetime there. Went from about 10 million in sales to 400 million in sales during my time. We scaled the sales organization from about 20, 30 people to more than 650 during that experience, and went through an acquisition ultimately at the end. So incredible ride during my time there. I had a number of sales leadership roles, and ultimately moved into the chief sales officer role, running the entire go-to-market for the last few years. at Glassdoor. I took a break after that and just decompressed after that type of hypergrowth experience takes a lot of energy and takes a lot out of you. It took about 6 months off and decided to get back on the horse with Calendly, and I've been at Calendly for about 9 months now.
Fantastic story. I just love these great stories, building and growth, building and growth, building and growth.
Yeah.
Especially if you think about Glassdoor and Calendly, and so I'm really excited to have you on the show because that's the name of the game right now. Every sales leader is really trying to figure out like how do I build and grow and scale this at nauseum, if you would. So great to have you. I always ask all of my guests a very special question, and that is tell us something nobody knows about you, even if they're looking at any or all of your social profiles. And Kate, I want something good, just don't confess any grave sins.
Okay, no grave sins. Got it. I think recently I moved back to caffeine. I was off caffeine for a long time. I have two children, and during my second pregnancy, moved completely to decaf, no caffeine, and then post pregnancy was very excited to not be addicted to caffeine and lived a few years like that. And I was the weird person that drank decaf all the time. I didn't give up coffee, but I did give up caffeine and drank a lot of decaf to the annoyance of all the coffee lovers in my life. But I recently, and you can blame Calendly for this, and the hypergrowth stage that we're at, I recently moved back to caffeine, so I caved, and now I'm back on the train. So there's your fact.
All right, well, I love it. So you and I used to be in the same boat. I actually stopped drinking caffeinated coffee when I was 19 years old, and that actually was a result of drinking too much coffee while I was at UC Berkeley, and I developed a ulcer as a direct result of it. I was drinking way too much. So to this very day, if I take just one sip of coffee that has caffeine, and it's the bean caffeine mix that really sets my stomach off. One sip, and at Starbucks, they hate me because every time just touches my tongue, I know instantly that I've got caffeine with coffee bean mix, and they're like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. You're right. I made it with," and I'm like, "Just one sip." So this very day, I actually only drink decaf, and I always tell folks, "Do you think that I need more energy?"
Yeah. Everybody, well, especially those who really love real caffeinated coffee. I mean, they just find it to be so strange that you could possibly do the experience of coffee without caffeine. But I just really like the ritual and the taste of coffee, so I'm with you.
It's just the taste. You gotta love it. Well, listen, you've spent a little bit of time talking about your career background, with Glassdoor, which was an amazing ride, especially, being there for 8 years and going from, a few handfuls of reps to over 600. And now over here at Calendly. And of course, everybody knows Calendly as the, productivity tool, right? The meeting tool for meeting links. And I'm a huge, huge, huge fan of it. But let's talk about the sales organization that you've got there now at Calendly and past experiences. Talk about some of the challenges that you think sales teams are facing in this digital first world.
Yeah, it's interesting. Buyers' expectations are really evolving. I'm sure you experience this every day in your work. More than 80% of transactions now have some digital component in B2B buying. And what I found interesting is recently I saw a fact that 73% of digital natives now are part of the buying process. So you just put all this together, and the experience and the expectations have really just changed. It's become far more complex, far more digital. The days of a siloed linear experience where you sort of hand off from one group to the next and it's really sequential are just over. Those days are done. So I think the challenges that a lot of sales teams face are, where are we going to interact? All of the when, the how, the what has changed versus the traditional sales funnel. And then you add on top of that, just everybody's in a virtual setting, which is just a challenge. So we're really trying to focus our own sales organization on just getting to those moments that matter with customers, doing them really, really efficiently and effectively in this digital world. And, hopefully doing that in a way that is really profitable. I think as a sales leader, one of the expectations that's rapidly changed in the last few months is, yes, you have to grow really fast, but it's become a yes and you need to do so profitably and think about the efficiency of your machine. It's no longer growth at all costs. So I think when you think about all of these trends that are emerging in the last month, over the last few years, it's become a new game for a lot of us in sales, and we have to rapidly adjust.
Yeah, recently I was talking with a customer of ours, and they said, we did 100% of our business by shaking people's hands face to face, and we are trying to get back there. And this is in the publishing world, by the way. And so we're trying to get back there, but we just can't get beyond like 40% of our meetings being in person. Everybody's like, "Hey, I'm comfortable working from home." And the hard part, they said, is now we have to figure out like, hey, does this person like video, or do they like text messaging, or do they like email, or do they like a phone call, or do they prefer an in-person meeting versus a virtual meeting, right? Do they like social media, or do they think it's too intrusive? And it's become so much more complex for a seller to figure out, okay, which one is it? And then if it's this one, how do I use this channel and how do I make it effective? Is that what you're referring to when you talk about like the digital first world and some of the expectations of buyers?
I think that's absolutely right. And as a seller, I think it can be very challenging to be accretive to this process. So much is available. We all heard the stats about the B2B buying process, 60% done by the time you actually talk to the customer, et cetera, et cetera. So how do you drive value and insightful experience with that customer, regardless of what channel you're interacting? And that's like a whole other discussion about how complex you could be in the various channels. But how do you drive an insightful experience with that customer? How do you make sure that it's really seamless and easy to get to that moment with your customer? And that you're, at the end of the day, we're all trying to provide value and make sure that customer wants to talk to us again and engage again because we provided them with something that they didn't know before. So, as someone who runs go-to-market teams, I think about that a lot. We have all these humans. Humans have these big brains to use. We need to power them with insights so that they can go have another conversation with another human that could only happen between those two people and couldn't happen across these digital channels. So I think that transformation is really interesting to me. I could like kind of talk about that all day, but that's one of the biggest challenges I think as a seller is the bar has been raised and you have to bring insights to a conversation now.
Interesting you mentioned that. I was talking with another customer of ours, and one of the things they mentioned, we were talking about our philosophy, which we call the PBC Sales Methodology. And that is, if you're extending outreach to somebody, you got to personalize that particular message with relevance. And then once they understand what business problem you solve, you need to bring value to that conversation with documentation, ebooks, white papers, webinars, videos, whatever it might be. And so one of the customers said, but wait a minute, like I want to hold that information back so that it forces them to have a meeting with me. And I said, that's an interesting perspective. The reality is they don't need you to gather that information. So
Mhm.
why not be the person to deliver them that value when they can go do that research themselves? And that's I think some of the things that we're talking about in this digital first world, like, whether it's 50% or 80%, whatever the number is that a buyer's through that process, they're out there doing research and gathering information, and then we've got to be able to fill in the gaps, if you would. Yeah. And bring that valuable content to the table. And that's what you're talking about in terms of sales led motions. Yeah.
I think what is an interesting entree to this subject is actually the product led growth movement and motion inside of a business. Because if you think, and I certainly adhere to this philosophy, let's give customers all the information they need to make a really good decision about whether to do business with Calendly or not. Are we going to drive value? Are we going to make a difference for their business? Let's be upfront and transparent. And PLG flips the funnel on its head if you think about it, because we're just going to give you the product to actually go try. And so the product has become a funnel for us, at not just at Calendly, but at every PLG company, where the burden of proof is very high, the price of entry is very low, so you have to bring value very quickly, and you have to make sure that that is an excellent experience for your customer. Where sales can provide value, I think, as a part of this experience, is not just helping them get into the product and helping them have a great experience, but showing unique data about how people are using the product inside the organization. So sales is really moving from taking a user and making them successful inside of a product to taking an organization to be successful using a product. And that, I think, again, back to the accretive value is, let's send a whole bunch of product insights about how their team is using the product, or how they could be using or getting more value from the product. And that's an insightful conversation to go have with a customer, just as one example, and the power of PLG and PLG data powered by a sales team.
So let's define these terms, just make sure everybody knows, because everybody knows that we've been talking about PLG, especially
Yeah.
because of our major pivot here at Vengreso. But PLG, product-led growth,
Mhm.
uh, SLG, sales-led growth, correct?
Correct. And I think people keep people's preferences around the acronyms for the sales part keep changing. Is it sales assisted growth? Whatever. It's a salesperson being accretive to the sales process in addition to a PLG motion. I think that's how I would define it.
Gotcha. And a lot of organizations don't have a PLG focus. Those are those selling into the enterprise where they've got enterprise software. Whereas in the case of Calendly specifically, and now Vengreso, you've got a ton of people on the individual side you mentioned earlier that are downloading, using, consuming. And you mentioned something about the salesperson. Their job now is to look at the trend and the data. Yeah. So I'll give you an example. Let's just pretend Vengreso had 1,000 people and I had 100 of our 1,000 people using Calendly. A sales-led growth motion, correct me if I'm wrong, would say, I'm going to look at all the data based upon how many different points of entry are inside of this particular organization. And then I'm going to say, hey, we've got 100 people. They're all paying whatever it might be, $15 a month. I can go give them a corporate license, potentially reduce their costs or keep it the same, because most likely people are expensing it back, but give them more value when having it consolidated so that they can use these licenses for other people and you don't lose certain pieces of data. You have it integrated into the systems, etc. Is that what you were referring to when you're talking about like assisting the sales team and looking and analyzing data?
Yeah, I think that is kind of the traditional description of a sales-led consolidation play with a PLG product. What I would add to that is we do a couple things at Calendly. You have all this rich product data. Let's take your example of the 1,000-person company and 100 people use it. We are certainly not prescribing that you reach out to those 100 people and create some experience that they weren't looking for as an individual user. If they want support, there are many ways for them to seek support. Having a salesperson call them and ask them if they want to upgrade as an individual user is not a successful motion in my experience. However, you can use that data and pull it all together in a consolidated way and serve up some interesting insights to someone who's kind of above the line, a decision maker at the organization, a business unit owner. And we do that in a couple of different ways. We have two different types of lead sources as it relates to the PLG funnel. The first is a product qualified lead. And so this might be an individual user that has done a bunch of actions that we think are interesting, a bunch of trigger points inside an organization. As an example, maybe they've lit up particular integrations that we know lead to team-based usage. But we're not going to do that for just anybody. We want to make sure it's the right person. We're talking to the right person at the right time. And so perhaps they're a director level inside the organization, and perhaps they're a director level inside the use cases that we think we provide the most value for. That would be a product qualified lead. That is a call we want the salesperson to make in this instance. So that's PQL. And then we have a product qualified account where there's just enough data and enough activity happening that even if that right person perhaps isn't a user yet, we need to be reaching out to a person at the right altitude to talk about the value that we could provide on an enterprise basis at Calendly. So I think those are the two ways that we use PLG data kind of uniquely and the way that sales drives value at Calendly.
Gotcha. And talk a little bit about, for a company that is PLG focused, when is the right time to introduce a sales-led growth team or motion?
Yeah, it's a tricky question because it'll be different from every business, but I can tell you some of the signs that we saw at Calendly that told us it was the right time. Certainly when you are hitting critical mass inside of a large organization, you're going to start to hear from your customers. And I think in most cases where this starts is you actually start to hear from folks in the IT organization. So they want to make sure you're secure and compliant. They want to make sure they have all the integrations locked down. And so you start to begin to get pulled up market by these requests, because if you don't, you run the risk of potentially alienating users inside large organizations, which is, you certainly wouldn't want to lose those folks. So if you're starting to hear from IT, I think that's a good sign that there might be interest for an enterprise play. And then I think, like all things, we just listen to our customers and listen to our users. And if there's value in an enterprise approach where teams are working with teams inside of your product and value gets unlocked when people work together, then I think that's a pretty obvious way to do it too. If you have a particularly technical product, I think, sales or a CSM-like person can support the sales process. So there's like a bunch of different variables that I would take in. But the top one would be, are your customers asking for it? And if the answer is yes, then you should probably be thinking about, adding a sales layer to make sure you're having the right conversations with those larger customers.
Yeah, I love that. And also, I think people don't even realize how many product-led growth companies that there are. First of all, and companies that started out as a PLG focused company, like LinkedIn themselves, right? As an example, product led growth. And that's now how they're selling out Sales Navigator now, right? They can see all the people that have premium. You think about some of these great companies like Dropbox as an example, or Loom. That one, people are just like, wow, I didn't realize that until, you point that out to them. And there's a lot of great companies that have evolved and come into this motion here, Calendly being, of course, one of them, and I'm not getting paid to say this, but absolutely 100% my favorite meeting link tool for booking meetings, favorite
Thank you.
productivity tool, 100%. Um, so first, how many sellers does Calendly currently have today?
We have around, I'll be broad for purposes of our public distribution here today. We have about 100-ish people in the sales organization.
Okay, and when you're looking at implementing some of the strategies you talked about, you've got 100 folks. What portion of them would you consider like the inbound versus the outbound? Like, or is there a delineation between inbound versus outbound?
Today there isn't, and I think the context here is important. Calendly is almost a 10-year-old company, and you gave a bunch of the background on the PLG portion of that company. For the first 8 years, it was entirely product-led growth. There were no humans actively out trying to sell to organizations in the mid-market or the enterprise space. So we are a 2-year-old organization inside of a 10-year-old organization. So I always joke, we're kind of like a Series B inside of a Series D, or very close to a pre-IPO company. So in a lot of ways, we're just getting started on building our go-to-market. And when you do that, very often in the early days, everybody kind of does everything. And that's a little bit of the phase that we're at. I think it'll evolve over time. We are very fortunate to have a healthy inbound demand at Calendly, both through our PLG funnel and just through the traditional marketing mechanisms of web forms and hand raisers, et cetera. So we have a good portion of our team focused on inbound, and we're just beginning to really kick up outbound and think about how to go create more value and talk to our customers about the value of an enterprise approach for Calendly.
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't realize that it's only 2 years old. You guys are still a baby when it comes to the bringing up the sales led growth motion, but it's actually very similar. Grammarly is another great story, right? Grammarly started out in 2009 and actually didn't start their sales led growth initiative until a month before COVID started. So 11 years that they operated as a PLG focused only company, and then brought in the business sales organization to be able to start taking and mining that data that you talked about. So it's a great story. I didn't realize that that was the same with Calendly. So it's clear that uh, you can coexist a product led growth company with sales led growth, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at all of the canonical product-led growth companies that have been doing this for a long time, the Dropboxes, the Slacks, the Atlassians, all of these players have sales teams now. And all of them, if you look at the publicly traded ones, have significant portions of their revenue coming from enterprise customers. And they all define that a little bit differently. But for me, what that implies is they do have humans out partnering with large organizations to drive value beyond just individual user purchases. And I think that's certainly the trajectory that Calendly is on, and I think it's the trajectory of most successful PLG companies over time.
So I have a question, and actually don't know the answer to this at all, but I'm very curious. In a sales-led growth motion, what happens when, as an example, an account does not sign a corporate license, and they may, and do the sales folks get paid on the individual license as well that are sold within their territory or within their accounts that they have?
Again, I think that's like such an individual choice that most businesses will have to make. And the principle that I would think about is the salesperson adding value inside of that transaction? So I think you go both ways. Let's go way A, which is a non-commissionable event, in my mind, is just someone came through the PLG funnel, happens to work at Vengreso, and signed up for a Calendly account without anyone ever reaching out to your organization, without that salesperson ever having interaction. Just because they happen to own your account, should they get comped? I think that's philosophical, and it depends on your growth curve and your economics, et cetera. But I think you could make a strong argument for maybe not a commissionable event in that particular situation. The counter example is someone owns the account, someone comes through the PLG funnel, but through all the data and tooling we have, we can see that some salesperson has been pounding the prospecting, really trying to get to the right person, sending tons of emails, tons of invites, tons of phone calls about the value that Calendly could provide. And perhaps that sparked the interest of this user to go and start a trial or start an account with Calendly. Philosophically, I think that probably should be a commissionable event. Again, depending on your structure, what type of commission, what type of profile, what type of role, all those things will be very dependent on the economics of your business and what you can afford to pay. But just to give you those two scenarios, that's typically how I think about it. Like, was there salesperson driving interest in that organization that is defendable? Yes or no? And if yes, then it's still philosophical. I would offer, just as general advice, and my philosophy on this is, if you're in the early days, I wouldn't spend too much time trying to be surgical about when you commission and when you don't. You just want deals. You want to get customers into your product, loving your product, and expanding with your product. And if you're spending a lot of time obsessing about whether a rep should be commissioned on a deal or not in those early days, I think that's probably, that's throwing good money after bad.
Love that. I want to come back to something that you mentioned about, sales reps having to mine data and make decisions based upon data that's presented to them, and talk a little bit more and dive deeply in that. What type of data? How do we get that data to them as sales leaders? How do we put this together and package it up? Or is it something that each person is actually doing and having to use their own thinking ability to put this all together? And you guys are so new at this, relatively in the last 2 years, that you probably felt a lot of the bumps and the bruises, especially since you've been on in the last year. That people need it a certain way, or they need this data, or what data do we have? How do we get them the data, and what platform do we get them in this data? So could you do me a favor? I want you to talk a little bit about how a modern seller today should be using data to be able to find the opportunity to go and target a customer, and then what do they do with that data? But before you answer that question, we're going to listen to this message from our program sponsor. Korn Ferry understands talent, and in the sales world, it's no different. Korn Ferry transforms sales teams using their world-class Miller-Hyman methodology, employee assessments, benchmarking, and talent advisor capabilities to increase win rates and quota attainment. Korn Ferry offers Korn Ferry Sell, a sales effectiveness app available in AppExchange and AppSource that helps your sales team develop and replicate powerful sales strategies that help sellers win more deals and crush their quotas. Learn more at kornferry.com/sales effectiveness. That's kornferry.com/sales effectiveness. Right before that break, I mentioned to you about data and how we can use data to be able to really penetrate accounts. Talk a little bit about that, Kate.
Yeah, I actually had this experience of evolution while I was at Glassdoor, and I think many companies go through this, where even if you're a company that has an abundance of data, it is still really hard to get that data to drive actionable insights for a customer or for your seller to help them prioritize their time. And so we went through this evolution of, we were a .com. We have a lot of consumer-facing data to help drive decision making. And we went through this evolution that was like, well, here's all the data. And the salesperson pretty much just got overwhelmed with all the data, and there was no direction about how to use the data, to your point. And each year we evolved the prioritization framework and how we use the data and how we use tools, and made it more and more programmatic. So like, the vision, I think, should be, when a seller comes into either their virtual office or the office that they work in now, and they open up their CRM, it should tell them where they should spend their time today. I mean, this should be all programmatically derived by revenue operations, in my opinion. So it could be a combination of firmographic data It can be a combination of product data, a combination of intent data, and there's probably 300 vendors across those three categories of things to drive data for your organization. But how do you suck that in and make it really manageable for a salesperson so that they again can come in and just have a dashboard that directs their activities for the day? We are not there at Calendly right now. We did go on that evolution, I think, to a great extent at Glassdoor, where we got better and better and better at that every year, not just for our sellers, but also the insights that we can provide customers. But it takes a while, and I do think it's a couple turns of the crank to get really, really good at that.
I think that's everywhere. We're even looking at even Vengreso, and I'm looking at marketing automation data. I'm like, what exactly is this report telling me? Like, I'm not sure if I understand this report. And you're constantly evolving that. But to be fair, though, when we look at when you look at a profile of a seller for hiring someone, are you looking for that person who can also have the analytics, or are you looking for the individual like the old school folks? What I've been selling for 26 years, right? And so it was like, did they have the gut? Did they have the presence? Did they have the Rolodex, right? Or what type of profile of a seller are you looking for from a modern selling standpoint?
Yeah, I think it's different depending on the product that you're selling. But certainly, if data is a big part of the story that you're telling, then you need someone who can be fluent in telling a data story. So you've got to have somebody who understands complexity enough to answer questions for customers, to know what they might be looking for in terms of what's in the data. So I think having that analytical slant for most sales roles now certainly would benefit a candidate. Although, I'm sure we could sit here and come up with examples where it's not as needed. I think, again, my experience at Glassdoor, it was high on the list, the analytical ability for a salesperson because we were so deep into data. And at Calendly, we're going through that evolution where we want to be able to talk about data with our customers, but it's probably slightly less important than it was at Glassdoor, just to give you the context or the contrast in those two things. I think being a great problem solver paired with an analytical ability is probably the home run there. So you can kind of think through what the customer might be thinking and then come with solutions that are backed in data. That's maybe the great combination for a seller in modern times that we're in.
I so love what you just said. In fact, one of the things that we're working on right now is really building out the use cases, because we want people to think. Like, if I say, as an example, with Vengreso and Fly Message, it's a personal writing assistant, right? So if you want to quickly build out your messages, your templates anywhere online, you put in a short code and up comes up whatever message you have built into it. Great. It saves you time from typing. Fantastic. But if someone says to you, I'm not sure if I see the value. Well, one of the things that we have to uncover is, well, let me ask you a question. Do you have any types of messages that you use, or snippets of messages over and over and over again? Not really. Do you have Zoom? Yes. How many times has someone asked you for your Zoom link? Oh, all the time. What do you do? Well, I have to either open up Zoom, then hit the little checkbox in the upper left-hand corner, then hit the copy link, then turn around and paste it inside of a message. And how long does that take? 2 minutes. What if you can type -ZOOM and then your link pops up every single time? Oh, I never thought about that. Right? So this is that getting into not the analytics, but really understanding those use cases and understanding the customer and the problem solving that you mentioned specifically. And I think that's one of the marks of a good, solid sales rep today is, do you understand the customer's problem, or have you found the pain and are you applying a solution for it? Thoughts?
I think this is particularly important for those who are in category creation or are trying to uncover problems that the customer is not aware of yet, or maybe is not conscious of. To give you the counter example of that, I think there are plenty of established categories where people go out to RFP and they're going to buy something. And that skill, that what I describe as the evangelist, like the evangelism of telling you your house is on fire, you have a problem, you don't even realize you have this problem and what the benefit could be to you, is probably less important in that setting. And your technical ability and more of the executive presence and constructing a strong argument on differentiation is probably more important in that kind of traditional sales setting where they've already decided to buy something. It's just whether it's going to be yours. But in the categories that we are in, we are very much, out, and it's our incumbent on our teams to be evangelists and to talk about and uncover these problems. So I think as you think about the different scenarios, again, it kind of comes down to what kind of business you're running, and then driving what kind of profile of a salesperson you need.
Love it. Great insights. Great answer too. On the counter on the other side, what could be an established category as an example. Do me a favor, Kate. Talk a little bit about measuring success, whether it's on the PLG side or on the sales led growth side. What do you measure and how do you measure it?
Yeah, I think this is. I'm a raving fan of revenue operations, which is part of my remit at Calendly, and I think this falls squarely into the responsibility of revenue operations is to keep us accountable and to be objective about whether we're measuring or we're achieving the measures that we set out to do. So that's the role of RevOps in my mind. It's volume, velocity, all of the metrics around funnel conversion rates, average deal size, sales cycle, what was our LTV, what is our CAC. We're measuring all of these things, and I think they are super, super important to be inspecting this stuff in a consistent way on a consistent basis. So again, if you're in the early days, you might look at the same data 7 ways. You might have a new person join and they want to look at it differently, and all of a sudden your reports look differently. I'm a big fan of just getting to the core KPIs that you're going to run the business on and having intense rigor on consistently looking at those things and knowing, yes, we can look at other data from time to time, but like this is what matters to us. And it's again those volume and velocity metrics that all fall into those categories.
Love your advice on this one, and that is you came on Calendly within the last year, almost a year, 10 months. I think it's been. Um, One, two, or three things that you said I'm going to focus in on, like laser in on. What were they?
Yeah, in the first 30 to 90 days building the plan for Calendly, I think it would be the plan for most at, again, that kind of growth stage of a company. The first was about just optimizing our inbound lead flow. It was the lifeblood of our organization. We needed to make sure that inbound was set up for success, and that our team knew how to capitalize on the inbound opportunity that was coming through the funnel. And so all of the initiatives and strategies we built were just around optimizing inbound. Paired with that, as we began to think about an outbound motion, we wanted to be able to hit the accelerator. We knew there are target accounts and target customers for whom we could drive tremendous value. And we just, to our earlier point, needed to go and cover that. And so we have started to build outbound motions. We've started to add outbound SDR teams as an example, and really codifying the playbook for that set of motions. And then finally, back to my friends in revenue operations, just all of the architecture and infrastructure that needs to be stood up in a company of this stage and size. So it was all of the kind of less exciting things of sales process, sales methodology, new comp plans, just the underpinnings of an organization. And if you don't get those things right, you're never going to scale. So that's really the work that we focused on in the first quarter or two.
Oh, just a small thing.
Yeah.
Not too
Yeah,
large.
you often hear that new leaders have this luxury of like listening and learning for the first 90 days, and I just think I have found in my experience in these high growth environments that's just not the case. You have to jump in and you have to listen as much as you can and try to not prescribe too much before you diagnose, but you also don't have the luxury of sitting back for a quarter and not not getting to the work of the work.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that, and I think it takes a certain mindset of a sales leader, right, to be able to feel comfortable in their own shoes with not that methodology. And it also depends on where you're going to. Like if you're going into accounting, maybe, of course, you might take 90 days, right? If you're going into legal, maybe you might take 90 days. But when the expectations are that you are going to produce and you still have a quota to hit, you've got to be able to make some quick decisions as a leader. And I think that's where a lot of leaders struggle at is being able to feel comfortable in their own shoes, making some of those decisions, which is why the characteristic of you have those what's called turnaround sales leaders. You bring somebody in to be able to help turn around the organization, or in your guys' case, we're in a growth and scale model, right? You can't wait a whole quarter to be able to make a decision on something. Like, good Lord, make some decisions and go. So when you think about some of the metrics then that you were looking at when you came in, as from metrics of success and or metrics that you wanted to focus in on, Example, for our organization, as we evolve now into this first chapter of as a product-led growth, there are several things that I'm looking at. And number one, I'm looking at the gross additions, right? So how many gross ads are we bringing on board in our freemium model, and what's our conversion rate look like? And then I'm also looking at what's our uninstall rate look like. And so those things tell me a story that allows me to be able to tweak here, tweak that, tweak this. For example, we have a 17% conversion rate from freemium to premium. That's strong, right? Out of the gates. But we also have a 17% uninstall rate. Well, that's bad, right? So if we could figure out what is the problem and how do we tweak that, and by the way, we know exactly what the problem is. We don't have a personalized onboarding experience. It's like you jump in the product and you're like, what do I do with it now, right? So that's an easy fix from a development standpoint. But those things are like super laser important. When you think about some of the metrics that you came in as a sales leader, forget Calendly being a PLG sales-led growth, just as a sales leader in general, or maybe it's specific to Calendly. When a sales leader comes in, brand new, you've been asked to lead the organization, 1, 2, or 3 metrics that you immediately look for that help to start telling a story.
You know, when I first got the role of head of sales at Glassdoor, way back when, I had a mentor who was on our board come in and give me some advice, and the advice was very simple. I said, what should I be thinking about? It's my first big job. You know, what are the metrics I should be watching? How should I be thinking about this? And he just said, pipeline, pipeline, pipeline. And that was it. And now as I reflect after years of running sales orgs, he was not wrong. And so when I first joined, you just have to obsess about what's your current pipeline, what's being added to your pipeline, what's shrinking, what's growing, and what are the targets that you need to seek to be successful. Because we always hear 3x, 4x, 5x, whatever, depends on the segment that you're in. But every business is going to be different, and so you can't just assume that you're going to step in and your conversion metrics are going to be exactly the same as the last business you were in. So with a lot of kind of studying the historical conversion rates, forward looking what we thought we were going to see, because when I stepped in at Calendly, we were almost entirely an inbound fed model. So inbound is your lifeblood. And if you're not obsessing about your pipeline metrics, I don't know what you're going to be obsessing about. So looking at all of the net adds and changes across the pipeline, and then beginning to implement some just general standards and expectations with the team around pipeline and pipeline creation, and creating a culture around pipeline generation can be change management exercise. And so that's where I spent a lot of my time. Now we're more focused on conversion rates through the pipeline. Well, not more. In addition to, we're very focused on cohort conversion rates through the pipeline, what our deal sizes are looking like as we sell more and more into the enterprise space and add our enterprise offering at Calendly. And so we're watching kind of the size and sales cycle metrics too, because the sales cycle is getting longer. You would expect to see it getting longer as you move up market, but you also want to expect to see the deal sizes growing. And so we're watching what deal sizes are coming into the pipe and how we're converting at different stages in the deal cycle, and all of that fun stuff. But I think to bring it back, the mantra of pipeline, 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 simple advice, but has rung very true for me in my experience.
Love that advice. It's funny. I've always been an enterprise guy, and even Vengreso legacy as a sales prospecting training company, it was all 85%, 90% of our business came from the enterprise. And so we were always used to, striking out $100,000, $1 million contracts, right, for sales training. And so it has been very difficult with PLG. Of course, we're talking about a single license, and it's like $397 or $997, right? And this is a big shift. And so today, I sent out a message, invited everybody to the company. There's like 25 of us in the company, right? Part-time, full-time, and I wanted to celebrate something that happened. We sold our first, which is our highest price plan. It's the $24.97 plan, and the annual prepaid, and that's $250, 17% discount off of 1 year. We sold our first one, which came as a result of someone hearing me speak, and they came in and then we got 20 licenses. And of course, like that 20 licenses is only like $5,000, right? so comparison, like I'm sitting here, I'm like $5,000, $1 million enterprise deal. It's very hard and very disparate. But these are the types of things that like get the motion going, and you see the momentum building behind that. So which was really cool to be able to see that. So it's been hard for me as the enterprise guy now thinking about individual sales. But it's a great motion to be thinking about what you had mentioned in just the evolution. And I love the way you broke that down, right? It's like, so you first came in and you're looking at what does our pipeline look like, and now we're looking at sales methodology. Now we're looking at conversion rates and those types of things. So this is a great model for any sales leader listening. It's like, you got to start with A, then you got to move on to B, and there's got to be a timeline assigned to that. And hopefully the organization's leaders will give you enough time to be able to make all those changes that need to be made, because it doesn't happen overnight. Am I wrong?
It doesn't happen overnight. No. And I think as you think about evolving a PLG business, and if you're marrying a sales-led effort with PLG and you're thinking about moving up market, and even just moving to the mid-market, that you have to be prepared that sales cycles are going to get longer. All of a sudden you're dealing with customer legal requirements, security requirements, and all of these things. If I do my job well, then the organization is prepared, because I've set expectations that this is going to be an experience. This is an experience that we have not gone through yet. And we need to have and build plans for enterprise readiness so that we can support customers of significant size in the mid-market and the enterprise space eventually as you're going through this evolution. So I would say that's the responsibility of the go-to-market leadership team, is to start to build plans for enterprise readiness. As an example, if you're moving from your $250, your $5,000 deal, whatever it may be, and that was all transacted online with just click-through terms, and all of a sudden you have a customer who wants to spend $50,000 with you, but is requiring custom legal and for you to work through red lines. I mean, do you have a contract attorney who's going to do that? Is there someone on staff who can support those requests? Are you going to do that as a CEO? Like, what is the decision here that's going to happen? And I think that can be a fun stage. If you have the right kind of crazy, then that's a lot of fun. And I certainly do, where I love to go build enterprise readiness inside organizations, but you absolutely have to be communicating that it's going to take time. And the wind in your sails you will find it eventually, but it's going to take more than a quarter or two to build a real enterprise motion.
Fantastic advice. Love this whole conversation. It's been absolutely awesome to have you on the show here. I always have two questions I ask here at the end, and that is, if someone wants to get a hold of you, if they want to connect with you, what's the best way? Twitter, LinkedIn? What do you think?
You can find me on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. So, and you can find Kate's profile. If you go to LinkedIn, it's KateAhlering. Oh, no, I spelled it wrong.
I think you got it.
Did I get it right? Okay, yeah. Okay, I get it. Ahlering. And make sure that you tell her you heard her on the Modern Selling Podcast. Please do not just send her a connection message and she has no idea who you are. Tell her you heard her on the Modern Selling Podcast. And oh, by the way, Kate, your all-time favorite movie, what is it?
Oh, prepare to have your world rocked. Aspen Extreme, which was a movie, I believe, from the 90s about two guys from Detroit who moved out to Aspen to be ski instructors, and all of the fun and drama that ensues. Highly recommend it.
All right, Aspen Extreme it is. We'll have to add that one to the list then to watch. Thank you so much for joining us today. For all of you listening in right now, don't turn that dial. We have a very important message for you to listen to. Korn Ferry sales effectiveness solutions are increasing win rates by over 20%. Find out how they can help your sales team. Visit kornferry.com/sales effectiveness. That's kornferry.com/sales effectiveness. Thanks for listening to the Modern Selling Podcast. Please do me a huge favor and give the Modern Selling Podcast a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. Oh, and don't forget, if you'd like to save 20 hours or more in a month and increase your productivity, go right now and download Fly Message, that's flymsg.io, for free. It's your free text expander and personal writing assistant. Hey, thanks for listening in, and until the next episode, good selling.